Blaine Gray, Plaster for Beginners. Today we're doing something different. I'm in Australia. We've been on holiday for about 5 weeks and I'm going to help my mate do this wall. Now we did the scratch coat about a week ago, applied it, scratched it, did everything you need to do. We grinded the paintwork back on the wall because it looks shocking, and then we've just got a nice scratch on. Now today we're just going to see what happens when we render somewhere else in the world. We've got new products, we've got very, very hot temperatures. Luckily we're in the shade, that's by design. Talk about that in a minute. And what we're going to do is just slowly walk through how we're going to finish this wall. We've got no corner beads, we've got render, we've got tools that are fairly new, some tools that aren't even up for work, but we're just going to get this done in the most modest way possible, which hopefully you'll learn a lot along the way. So first thing, it's very hot. This wall is drying out rapid. Not only that, I think the blocks, bricks used underneath are very porous, which means that whatever moisture or product you put on top, it's just going to drain quick and it's not going to give you much time to finish. So I'm going to keep this wall hydrated. I've had my daughter do it 2 times. I've been over it once myself. And what we're going to do before we start, we're just going to get a good application of water. And what I'm going to do is just soak it as I go. So instead of applying the render bone dry, what that'll do is just suck all the moisture out and give you no time to work whatsoever. And you'll realise later on in this video we need time. So I'm just going to put a bit of water on there. And again, I'm just going to keep the hose next to me and keep it hydrated. Now, I've got my mate's leftover tools. This looks rusty, but it's actually a decent trowel. So the first thing I'm going to do is just get the render on. So get a nice tight coat on. We have had a fairly decent scratch coat at the beginning. Now it wants to pull, that moisture's still in on that scratch coat, but to be honest, I'd rather it be wetter than drier. So I'm just going to apply that coat. I can see that moisture is sat on that scratch, which means we should hopefully be trapping some of that moisture below, which means it's going to give us a bit more time to work with. When we did the scratch coat, it was drying out so fast, and that's what I'm trying to avoid. So I'm going to apply that. We've got the tops to form as well, which means we're going to have to form it with a straight edge to get the angle. I'm just going to work that up to there. We've got a fence post working up to this side, so that's not as crucial, but still, we're going to still try and get that angle. The product I'm using is totally new. It's an acrylic render. So that's the new product in itself, something I've obviously never used because I've never worked in Australia like this. But it actually feels pretty good. Smooth. It's not bad. Now we're getting really professional with the tools. I've got a piece of decking and we're going to use this as a straight edge. We're going to apply a bit as we go. Pull it back. And get the wall. We never forget to flatten a wall using a trowel. You always flatten it using preferably a derby or straight edge, but we don't have that privilege today. What we're doing is getting it flat, and we're going to fill in any excess. Any low spots, fill them back in. Again, I'm working with tools that I've not really used before. From my friend's house, he don't want to start rendering, he don't want to learn, so we're going to try and keep it as cheap as possible. So we're literally just doing it as modestly as we can. So what we're doing now is filling in any low spots as we go in. Now I need to also form this edge. We haven't got any beads, so we plant that there. That's going to be our straight edge there. Take a little bit. Now there's a bit of movement at first, but the suction between the render and you is going to hold that in place. Just going to make sure it's in the right spot. And we tilt that side up, pull that away, and there's your edge. Now, I'm going to leave that for now. What we're going to do is play with it later on. I need that to dry. I don't want it to be as sharp as that. I'm going to chamfer it when it comes to the drying process, but for now, that's the edge we want. Okay, so like I said, we are dealing with very basics tools, and despite the fact we are in Australia, everything stays the same. The process stays the same. And to be honest, the tools can stay the same. You don't need high-tech tools, you don't need state-of-the-art rules or trowels to get the job done. And I'm going to show in this video that actually if you follow some basic set of rules, then rendering can be the same world over. The difference here is the fact we're dealing with hotter temperatures, and like I say, we're going to go through that in today's video and talk about how we get around it. But everything else stays the exact same. Which is why it's so cool to have such a modest budget like this, where we're using a crappy little bit of decking as a straight edge. I'm sure it's slightly skewed to one side, kept digging in the wall, but what you'll find is that you don't need to rely on state-of-the-art tools. They do help, don't get me wrong, but as you'll see later on, we are going to get this wall dead flat using standard methods. And it was made a lot harder not having beads. I remember when I worked in New Zealand rendering that they generally didn't use any beads whatsoever, the company I work with, so I don't know what the crack is, but we went into the local Bunnings. It's their version of like B&Q. Massive place, huge place. It's like 4 times the size of our B&Qs. They're huge in Australia. But anyway, there was no beads to be seen anywhere. I was in there for hours just looking around, but yeah, still no beads. But still, you can still form edges like we're using here, as long as you got something that's straight and something that you can rely on to give you a flat edge. Then it doesn't matter about beads as long as you're following the process here. The only good thing we had on our side is because of the temperature, it allowed the angles to dry fast, which means we could move on and get them angles formed pretty instantly, which is always good when you're working with an angle to be formed. So like anything in rendering, what we want to do is make sure that we're ahead of the drying period. So like I mentioned before, we've deliberately watched the weather and made sure we've got no direct sunshine hitting this wall when I'm rendering. Now it's not always possible, but from about midday we knew that there'd be no sunlight on here, especially in a place like this. You're looking at 36, 34 degrees, high humidity, and we've got a background which is really porous. So what we've done is continuously sprayed it as we've gone along, and that way we keep it on top of the suction rate. Suction rate basically means how fast the moisture from the render is going to get pulled out. The faster, the less time you have to work on it. So we're not working in direct sunshine, we haven't got too much wind, and our mix is a bit wetter, which is enabling us to keep that moisture trapped into that render, and that way we can stay on top of the suction. So we're getting through it, we're working through it slowly. Again, if anything, I probably need to add a bit of moisture to that render. Even the render's drying out quite fast in the bucket, which shows that it is obviously hot. So I'm trying to stay on top, working as fast as I can, getting it flattened and leveled as I go. Again, just keep it on tops. Make sure I've got a straight line running through along the edges there. And what we're going to do at the end during the floating period is just finishing the tops separately. I'm not too bothered about the tops yet. In theory, you should have some coping stones, but I'm going to finish it so it looks nice anyway. But more importantly, that edge has got to stay clean. So by this point, I'm moving fast, and you know, there's some diehard plasterers would have realised that if you're rendering, you render right to left. Now, the idea was that I wanted to stay out of the sun, and when I started, there was still a bit of sun peeping on the right hand side, so I started the other way, started left to right. Like I said, rendering, you traditionally go right to left. That's the way you should work towards your render, but like I said, we didn't have all day, and I wanted to make sure I was completely in the shade. So I was chasing the sun really, and we'd studied it the day before and did scratch, and I did a bit of work with him doing some other bits, odds and sods, whatever. So we kind of studied the sun, which is essential if you are working in hot temperatures, to really analyse where that sun and the heat's coming from and stay out of it if possible, because it makes a massive difference. Get a close up on the old flip-flops there. Let them know that health and safety is all about in Australia. Yeah, I can't say my health and safety game was bang on, but I love the Australian hats, by the way. Everything, all else aside, rendering. These hats were brilliant. Keeps the sun right off you. And you think these shirts would be dead warm, right? You think you'd be sweating all the way through. They actually make a huge difference when you work in these shirts. So you do really keep you cool. I don't know why, because it's pretty thick material, but there you go. The Australians obviously have something right there. So now we're on to the finishing stages. I'm going to quickly give you a little run through here. We've got a float. I'm going to talk you how to break in this float. This is a brand new poly float. It was about £8 or something. Anyone can get these floats, but they are rubbish when you start off. So I'm going to show you a hack later on in this video on how to deal with it. But basically what we're doing now is starting to finish the render. We're closing it in. We're filling in the gaps left from our poor attempt of a straight edge, and then it's all sponged to a nice finish. So that's what we're going to go into detail here, and now I'm going to show you exactly how it's done on this side of the continent. And your finger. And if boss thinks... Right, so we've got the render on, we've ruled it off. Now we get to the point where we're going to really close in that render. Now, because of the heat and the temperature of the day, you've literally put it on, gone back to the beginning and started floating. Now, one problem, these floats when you're buying brand new, rubbish, absolutely crap. So what I like to do is rub it up and down a big block or a brick first, get rid of that coarse detail in the front. And then I've had my good friend cameraman Al, he's actually got a little sander and sanded the front down. That is just to take the edge off, because when it comes to the floating side, you need this to be fairly smooth. So that just takes a bit of edge off. Now, again, I've said it's taken in quite fast. It's going to hose a little bit of water on. And now as you can see, what this stage does, it really starts to close in the gaps. So I'm going to close it again, give it a little spray. And what we're going to do is that makes that mix creamier again. It brings that mix back to life. That moisture activates the lime inside the render and allows it to give it that workability. So if it's still a bit dry, we use a hose, spray it down. Now we're going to start closing in them gaps. Starting to look a bit smoother. Again, we form the edge along the top there. What we're going to do is just go one way, horizontally preferably. Now I'm going to chamfer that front off a little bit. I'm going to finish the top at the same time. Now I'm going to float towards the angle. I'm floating towards it, and then we're going to come down. And that's what's going to give you that sharp detail. Again, it's a bit loose, and bring it down. And then give it a little chamfer. You don't want too much of a sharp edge to chip off. That's that. And carry on floating. Now what you will find is a few little low spots, little patches here. I've got the same mix of render, which is now fairly thick. Put it into any low areas, float it in. That's how we continue to close in the gaps and start filling any sections that are low. The bottom's very dry, a bit of water. See that patch there? There's obviously no render on. Bit of render I'm going to spray up because that's quite thick. Ideally, you'll use the same render mix that you had previously. Don't mix up a new batch, you don't want it to be wet. This render you're using, you want to be thick. So when you're filling in, it fills in nicely with itself. If it's too wet, it'll just go everywhere. You won't make a nice job of it. So again, Ready to go. And then I've got a helper helping me. Darren. It's the brother-in-law, let's say. He's the guy who owns a house. He's gonna finish it. Aren't you, Darren?
That's it. Making it look nice.
So you just get the sponge, hold it flat to the wall. There's a bit of moisture in there, but not too much. And you're literally just getting that aggregate to the surface by sponging it. You're just gonna work it in, and then you're left with a nice, clear finish on the wall. That's it. That's the finish, the texture throughout. So what I'm gonna do, it's good to have Darren here. He's gonna work at the same time. I'm gonna work across, floating. He's gonna follow behind, sponging. And we're gonna get this done and have a beer. Do you like my hat, by the way? How good is that? Proper Australian cap. Flip flops. Health and safety all over the gaff. Let's go. If you are forming edges, allow a bit of time because it really does eat into the amount of time spent when you are rendering. It takes time to create that nice formed edge, and ideally you'd have a longer straight edge. You don't really want to be relying on the length that I had. Like I said, my mate wanted to save money. He didn't want to spend a load of money. He's renting this place out and he actually wasn't too bothered about the wall. I was bothered, but he wasn't. So in the future, if you are doing it, use a longer straight edge and a better material. Right, Al, I'm going to show you something. You've got a bit that keeps cracking out, and that's because I'm working against it. So if you have got that, use your trowel as a straight edge. So I'm going to float to that trowel now, following the wall. And then we're going to come across and work away from the render. If you have got it where it's cracking out, because what it is, if you're floating towards the outer edge, it's just going to pop it. So I'm going to fill in the tops here. You can do the same on this side if you need. Fill in that section. Again, this is because in Australia we couldn't find any corner beads for rendering, so we had to do it freehand. That's just the way it is. So I'm going to float towards that trowel. That's my straight edge there. Pull down. Again, if you want to make double check, float in. And now that's too sharp for me. So I'm going to give it a slight chamfer. And what I'm doing is I'm turning that float, I'm giving it a slight twist, and that's just softening that edge. Then we come down, work away, and there you go. So if you want, use your trowel as a straight edge. Obviously we formed that initial line with the timber we used. Now we're just going to enhance it with that. So that's that. Now when we are forming the edges, again, if we had a longer piece of timber, this would have been a lot better because we would have kept that length all the way through. But we've just done it in stages. We've obviously ruled the wall flat, so we knew where the parameters were. But when you are forming edges, it's good to have a nice stiff mix. Now this was too stiff. I couldn't even be asked putting water to the mix. But it was too stiff at this stage. But as I mentioned earlier, if you are floating render, and you're floating up, use the old render that you had before. Make sure it's stiff. You don't want it to be wet, because what we're doing is we're kind of making sure that we're blending the old stuff with the new. So I just sprayed all my my daughter and my mate right in the face with water. I'm sure they loved it, it was hot. But anyway, we want to make sure we're using the old gear, and that's why it's so important to have a decent straight edge, because that's what's going to give us that straight edge running through. But ideally we would have had a longer piece. So it's always good to have someone else with you where he's holding that timber against the render. And this is basically how all edges used to be formed. There was no beadwork. There was never beads ever in the past. This is how it was all done. Bits of timber, bits of straight edges, and you work towards that, and you're relying on that to give you your plumb straight edge. That's how it's done before, and that's how we're doing it here. So I suppose the only difference in the UK is we really do rely on beadsworks. I especially do. But remember, like I said, when I was working in New Zealand, they really didn't. It was all formed in. So it's a good skill to learn, to be fair. And we are coming to towards the end of the wall. Again, there's a bit of sun shining through there, but we have timed it perfectly. The sun has just left on that front edge, which is exactly what we wanted. And that's really what the idea was, is we could constantly staying out of the heat. We're making sure that we are doing this rendering in a nice controlled manner. But this is what happened when we rendered in Australia. Bit of a random video. I'm back home now, but there is no difference really. There's no difference to what side of the world you're working on. The process is the same. The only difference is the temperatures and the tools we're using. So that is the video of us working down under. We are just finishing this wall off with a nice little sponge. Again, sponging that right to the front, making sure we're getting the aggregate through. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. You know, even my attire, where I'm dressed in Australian gear, it's a bit different. And if there are any Australians out there watching this video, let me know what you think. Did I pass the test? And did I manage to pull off your lovely Australian workwear? Thanks a lot for watching. Let me know what you think. That's the end of that wall. Sun's just peeping through, but yeah, that's that wall done. Another job finished. And now check out the next video where we'll be back in the UK. Thank you very much. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.